Good evening. Thank you all for coming. We're all gathered here, obviously, for a joint meeting between the Select Board and the Public Safety Committee, most of the members of whom are here. Thank you all for coming. We're in the fortunate position of being able to have this conversation not under a situation of crisis, but because we want to and need to explore what Putney is looking for in public safety, both police. I mean, in this instance, we're talking mostly about police, but also fire, ambulance, et cetera, are the ones that come up. Many parts of the country, as we're mostly aware, are experiencing all sorts of turmoil in this realm, and we're fortunate not to be experiencing that. So we've been working through terms with the Windham County Sheriff's Department and in discussion with Vermont State Police, et cetera, for a number of months now, as many of you, I'm sure, are aware. Just a brief history of our relationship with the Sheriff's Department. Cynthia went back through records and found that we have been contracting with the Sheriff's Department since 1968 for various different levels of service. Throughout the years, that varied from early on, apparently roughly 50 hours a week, then sort of up and down depending on budget, timing, need, et cetera, over the years, until several years ago, I think we were closer to more like 25 hours a week, 8 to 10 years ago. And 7 years ago, Keith Clark approached us about becoming part of a program to increase community policing, and there was grant money available for that. So we signed on. We had basically 3 years of a full-time contract with the Windham County Sheriff's Department, at which time Melissa was installed in Putney as our 40-hour-a-week person. I think 40 hours a week would be an understatement for how much time Melissa spent on that, but that's what we were contracted for under the grant. That continued. The grant money ran out after it sort of transferred during the third and fourth year. Putney started to pay salary for that. Most recently, last year, we had a contract that amounted to the equivalent of 40 hours a week at a price of about $52,000 a year. We had been offered a contract with the Windham County Sheriff's Department in the fall of last year, looking forward to a 40-hour-a-week contract as well, in the amount of roughly $57,000, which we had budgeted for. That's what we had discussed at town meeting, in the budget at town meeting, for a variety of different reasons. I believe it was in the end of March or beginning of April, the Sheriff's Department rescinded the offer for that contract, I think for a couple different reasons. My sense is that that was a combination of the fact that they didn't feel it was possible to offer us that amount of time for that amount of money. I think also at that time they were perhaps understaffed to a degree that it looked to them like providing us with 40 hours a week was not going to be possible for them. We discussed possibly entering a contract with the Vermont State Police, who are, the way the structure works, many of you may know this, but the Vermont State Police are required to respond. They are our primary responders in the town of Putney. Anything that comes in that's a life safety issue, that is a criminal issue, the Vermont State Police are required by statute, and correct me, you're Lieutenant Oliver, sorry. Yes, correct me if I'm making misstatements about this, but Vermont State Police are required to respond to anything that basically they're called for in the town of Putney. They have to triage how to respond to those calls based on how far stretched they are in various different locations, et cetera. So their ability to respond in a timely fashion, or what we might consider a timely fashion, is not always what we might hope it would be. But obviously, if they're dealing with, you know, a more dangerous situation elsewhere compared to something that we're facing, they have to prioritize that effectively. So regardless of whether we are under contract with Windham County Sheriffs or not, the Vermont State Police still are required to respond in Putney if they are called upon. But they, again, their ability to respond sort of immediately is not always as much as we might like it to be. But they always do in as timely a fashion as they're able to. We could contract with the Vermont State Police for service to have them have time that they are scheduled to be in the town of Putney for law enforcement purposes, whether it's traffic violations or patrol, or essentially under our guidance, whatever we would choose to have them do. Similar to the way we contract with the Windham County Sheriff's Department for the same purpose. The biggest difference between the two and the way the contracts work is that the Windham County Sheriffs are not, their funding is not underwritten by the state. So when they have to spend time doing investigative work, court time, et cetera, that's above and beyond that 40-hour-a-week time, it either has to take from that 40-hour time slot in order for them to do that, i.e. they're not in town for 40 hours because they have to be doing that on other time, and or they have to charge an additional fee to do that. The Vermont State Police, once they have responded to a call here and they are the primary investigators, they are required by statute, regardless of whether they're under contract with us or not, to follow up on whatever is necessary for them to follow up, whether that includes investigative time or court time or whatever it might be. So it's a very different financial structure for the two. The Public Safety Committee has been exploring different possible ways of how we can do this going forward. The third model that has come up, which has not been, had not previously been something that Putney had been doing, was the possibility of formation of our own police department. And it was interesting actually reading back in some of the notes from the early town reports from the 60s and 70s. The Windham County Sheriff's Department was actually recommending that Putney form its own police department, which would essentially be under the supervision of the Windham County Sheriff's Department. In today's day and age, it probably would not work that way. It would be an independent police department. There would be collaboration between the two, but it would not be supervised by the above. But so essentially, I'm going to turn it over to Public Safety Committee to talk about sort of what these different models look like, what some of the statistics are that we've been up against, and where we're at. So,
take over. The next item on the agenda is what the Public Safety Committee has been doing, and the first item is crime statistics. We've been attempting to gather crime statistics with regard to what Windham County Sheriff responds to, as well as what the Vermont State Police responds to. The Windham County Sheriff provides statistics every year in the town report. They're published in the town report along with the text. I've compiled those statistics for the last 4 years. However, they are not as elucidative as you would like them to be. There are items on there that they report call data is what they're reporting. So you would think it would be calls for service. You got on the phone and dialed and I need the police here. There's things on there for things like the smart cart. The smart cart is what we've all seen, that white cart next to the road that tells you you're going 35 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. That's not a call for service. I don't think anybody in Putney asked for that to be in their front yard. So things like that are included in the report that are very obvious. I don't know what other things are included in the report that are really not calls for service, so it's hard to tell that. Even some of the, I dare say it, some of the addition is not good. Most currently, the 2015 fiscal year, they, in their graph, which looks something like this is larger form, in the town report, it's online, if you like to look at it, they report there was 180 calls for service. I added up all of those, each category, it comes up to 341. So I'm not sure how accurate this data can be, or what can be extrapolated from it. And of the last 4 years, they provided data only in 12, 14, and 15. 2013, they did not provide any call data, just a total number. I also obtained copies of the studies that were conducted by Norwich University. There were 3 different studies conducted with regard to crime analysis, the impact of Landmark College on calls for service in Putney, but these studies were completed, as you can see, in early 2013. So again, the data is not the freshest data, and the data was gathered before the date this was completed.
Can you just, I'll put that on the website if anybody, or you can come to I didn't make copies for everybody because there was so many pages, but I'll put it on the website and I'll have some at the office if people want to look at them.
Yeah, you'll see, if you go to your town report, you'll not only see the numbers, but each year the Sheriff's Department provides a statement of what they've done in town, so that'll give you an idea on that too. Anecdotally, I spoke to law enforcement personnel throughout the county, various people, and the chief from Rescue Inc., Drew Hazelton, and asked him kind of what since they have a relatively large region that they cover, I thought get an idea of what his thoughts are about what is happening. We have a very changing picture in this county right now, in that the barracks for VSP has moved and consolidated into Westminster. The changing shape and scope of the authority that the Sheriff's Department is handling, they're leaving the court in Brattleboro, that sort of thing. So all these things are in flux at this point. What Chief Hazelton said that they have noticed is that they have had increased staging time. Well, that's what they call it. It's the time when you call 911 for something, say a domestic violence that involves injuries, they're going to respond, but they don't roll up on the call until law enforcement's present. Their staging time is the time that they're sitting there waiting for law enforcement. They have seen that time increase gradually, but it's increased over the last year to 18 months. It's gradually creeped up, so their trucks and their drivers are sitting waiting for law enforcement to respond before they can roll in. So these are the things that the information we've been able to gather. I've been in contact with Sheriff Clark, and he has assured me that information and data is forthcoming via Lieutenant Anderson. I have not yet seen that, so I don't know what they've been able to compile or how quickly they can compile it. It seems to me it should be able to be compiled relatively quickly, but I don't know the data processing capabilities of the Sheriff's Department. So that's what I can tell you about the efforts to ascertain hard numbers on what happens within our town. Town Constable report.
Town Constable.
Yeah.
You wanna go?
Yeah.
So one of the areas that we have been exploring, the town is required by statute to have a constable appointed. We voted back several years ago to make it an appointed position instead of an elected position. But the constable doesn't have a lot of power. And there's certification that's required to do police type activity. So a constable who has no certification from the state may only serve civil and criminal process, destroy animals when required by law, kill injured deer in accordance with law, assist the health officer in exercising his or her duties, serve as a district court officer, remove disorderly people from town meeting, and collect taxes if no tax collector is elected. That's what the person could do by statute. They can, if they were to get, and this is a very brief conversation about constable, and it's one of the areas that we were looking into when we're looking at what can we do for policing in Putney. There are very few towns that use constable for, they might have a constable that's appointed, but there's very little activity that they cover in town. One town that I ran into was the town of Cavendish. They have a constable that has some certification, so they do some police. They do some of the police work, but they also contract with Windsor County Sheriff. So I'm not sure how much we're going to explore that option as we go through this process and find out what the community thinks we need for policing. We certainly will have to explore it a little because by law we're supposed to appoint one. We just haven't, well, we haven't had anybody interested since Henry resigned. And at this point right now, I'm not really sure what we want that person to do other than the basic things that they can do by statute. So really and I just want to say what I really want, I'm hoping to get out of this meeting and what's going to help me move forward and help these guys figure out what their recommendation might be is when we get to the section where it's public comment and you guys is really gauge what it is we want for policing. What is the level of service that we want? How much I know we're not going to answer this completely, but how much we're willing to pay for it, and then which of these options is going to give that to us? You know, try to lead us into which area do you really want us to work on? Because right now, I think there's not any one of us that's leaning towards any one option because we really don't know what everybody's experiencing on a daily basis and what they expect when they have something happen. So that's the constable section. The next three sections, Windham County Sheriff, Vermont State Police, I think that Josh already did a pretty good job of explaining what those options are. An ongoing conversation is going to be happening with Keith based on a conversation Josh and I had with him as to where the department is going and what he can or cannot provide for us in the future.
And I stated that our last contract with them was for a 40-hour-a-week position. Currently, that has been reduced to a 20-hour-a-week position, and the cost of it has increased significantly.
For 6 months.
We entered into that contract for 6 months, from July 1 to January 1.
Can you tell us what the current cost is?
The current cost is about $52,000 for a 20-hour-a-week contract versus 57 was what we were going to pay
That's
for
per year, not for 6 months, though.
Right, exactly, sorry. Yeah, so it's about $26,000 for the 6-month period. Roughly what that breaks down to is a $49 an hour position to have somebody in town. The contract with the Vermont State Police offering a range of coverage depending on what we wanted was a little over $66.
68.
$28.35.
$68.35 an hour for their services. And one of the discussions we had, which I alluded to, was that the added benefit of having the Vermont State Police is that their time that's spent out of the town of Putney is covered by the state, not covered by us. So, you know, it's hard to make an apples to apples comparison between those two without knowing exactly what the hours spent are. As Cynthia said, discussion with Keith, we talked about entering into this for a 6-month period based on our needs to have somebody in town, with the interest in exploring at essentially through the budget process and at town meeting time whether we were interested in going back to a 40-hour-a-week contract. You know, I'm guessing if we were going to go to a 40-hour-a-week contract, we'd probably be looking, and this is strictly me sort of taking bits and pieces of conversations with people, we'd probably be looking in the high 70s to 80-ish for a 40-hour-a-week contract with the Windham County Sheriffs. You know, how negotiable that is, we don't know. But as I said, I think part of the reality that the Windham County Sheriffs have been facing is that they can't provide the contracts that they've been providing for the money that they've been charging to do it. So that is not a reality that's going to continue at that cost basis. So, Carol, can we get through
We're almost
the
there,
rest of this,
Joe.
and then we'll start questions.
I think it's just the municipal police department.
Yeah, the municipal police department, and Jeremy Evans provided the town with a proposal of how something like that would look if we were to want to explore it, basically, including the costs for personnel, sort of most of the introductory stuff that we would need in order to enter into that. And then Cynthia took that and elaborated on it to a certain degree, based on insurance needs, dispatch, various other things that were not included in the proposal that was presented to us. And if you want to speak to that, Cynthia's also been communicating with other municipalities in the area that have independent departments and what those look like, so.
So just a rough draft of a budget, and I think the things that, there's a couple things missing. One is the dispatch number, which we're working on getting an estimate. And then a few tweaks, I think some vehicle fuel thing, and then I think there's some administrative support. And this is for a one person, 40 hours a week. For the first year, we're looking, because of the capital costs, around $150,000. And like I said, that's without dispatching, and that could be a pretty big number. I don't have any idea. On an ongoing basis, the total operating costs for the year look like around right now it's 98,000, but I don't know that dispatching number. So, but in doing the kind of calling, I sent an email out to all of the town managers that I have on an email list and got back some information, asked them if they'd ever been involved in forming a municipal department, asking for their feedback. And without going into too much detail, and I can put this on the website too so people can look at it, they range from 160,000, that's the town of Pittsford. They have 80 hours a week coverage, 1 full-time officer and 6 part-time officers. I don't know how part-time they really are. Up to, I mean, Ludlow's almost $1 million, you know. So if you look at a place like Weathersfield, I think was one that we were kind of thinking was comparable. They have 1 police chief, 1 full-time officer. They use 4 part-time officers. They don't have 24/7. They also work closely with Vermont State Police, and their budget is $271,000. So you can see it's a range. I mean, everybody had an opinion. Everybody had, you know, there were some that were really happy. Pittsford, they transitioned from a constable to a police department. And they're in the middle, I think they're happy right now because they're in the middle of a COPS grant. They're getting a lot of money. So that might, but that's basically the answers that we have with the municipal police department. But hopefully during this discussion, we can decide, is that something we still should pursue as, or should we steer our direction somewhere else, is kind of where we're at. I think
Can I
that's.
provide some clarity too here?
Yes.
When we're talking about full-time, you're talking about 1 employee 40 hours a week. That's not full-time coverage for the
Right.
town for 168 hours. And then when you have that 40 hours a week, again, that 40 hours a week, you have to cut into pieces of administrative work, court time, patrol time. So those are things you need to think. So when we say full-time, it's 40 hours, not 168 hours covering the entire week, 24/7.
Which is part of the reason why in most of these departments that you see 1 full-time person and a bunch of part-time people, because then they can actually have sort of, not constant coverage, but reasonable coverage during times that they need to, and yet allow 1 person to do all the other, you know, logistical part of it that has to be done, which is very time-consuming. You know, I can't remember exactly what the numbers are. Somebody from Windham County Sheriff's might be able to answer. You know, for each call, I think actually Dana Shepherd informed us that for each criminal call, there's roughly 3 to 4 hours of follow-up. Is that right?
Pretty close.
Somewhere in that range. So, you know, depending on the nature of a call and depending on the nature of the investigation, you know, 40 hours a week can disappear pretty darn quickly when you're responding to even a relatively small number of calls within a town like Putney. So, So from there, unless anybody else on the committee has anything more they'd like to add, I guess one thing I would like to comment is, I think that there has been a lot of information circulating about, there have been some robberies in town, as people are aware. Some have been more significant than others. Most recently the most recent one I'm aware of was on Saturday night. The Central School got broken into. 2 guys spent the bulk of the night there, sort of having a pretty good time wandering around, collecting stuff, ultimately going for a swim. Anyway, they ended up turning, after a significant social media push, they ended up turning themselves in, fortunately. So they are being managed now by the court system. There have been several cars broken into. At least a handful of houses that I'm aware of have been broken into with varying degrees of amounts of theft, some quite substantial, some not so much. What we're talking about tonight is not specifically focused on this recent stuff that's been happening, and I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is that regardless of what we end up with for a police service, there are still going to be burglaries, there are still going to be break-ins that happen, cars, etc. It's impossible to police everything all the time in a town like Putney. Right now we happen to have had what seems to be sort of a rash of things that happen. That happens from time to time. They come and go. The neighborhood that they affect comes and goes. So what we're looking for is a reasonable balance between trying to have the coverage we need for safety purposes. I think most of us share the opinion that the model of community policing of some variation, which really is aimed at taking a more proactive approach than reactive approach, is something we all like and desire. How realistic that is within our budgetary constraints and what we can do, what that model looks like, a little bit up for debate. But I guess that's where I feel like the select board and the public safety group are mostly coming from, unless anybody would disagree with that. So, questions? Answers? Oh, Carol, yes, Carol had a question first.
I just was wondering if we have enough information to know when we had 40 hours, were break-ins less than when we had 25 hours?
I'm not sure we have enough information to accurately determine that. And that's sort of what I was referring to. Yeah. Well, let's have Mike.
They're just like they are now. The rash comes and goes, just like you said.
They happen.
Right, they happen.
So that may be somewhat anecdotal without having the actual numbers in front of us, but I think that it's realistic to say that at certain times during the 40-hour-a-week time, yes. At other times, no. Nature of the beast.
I can give some figures on it. What was reported in the town report for 2012 was that there were 8 burglaries. 13, we don't have any figures. For 2014, 5 reported, and 2015, 2. So again, there's a, and again, these are figures that are somewhat suspect.
The other thing that's a little bit complicated about those figures, I think, and I don't know accurately about this, but whether everything that we hear about in a neighborhood, for example, actually gets reported. I know that there were a couple car burglaries in roughly our neighborhood. I don't know whether those were reported. Those would not be included in current statistics because they're too recent, but I don't know how much of this stuff people, we hear about through social media and through neighbors, et cetera, versus how much the Windham County sheriffs actually hear about and end up investigating. I don't know.
So do we actually have a number for 2015, 16? I mean, more current estimate even?
We have for fiscal year 2015, it ended in June. That's what's included in the town report that was issued in March.
And that was 2 or something?
That was, yes, 2 for the fiscal year ending in 15.
And for since then?
We don't have those figures.
So as a group, do you guys have an idea?
No, I think
No.
I think one of the things that I want answered that would help me is, no matter who we're with, when can I get that information? Because I didn't know about the break-ins until someone called me and that their house was broken into and said there's been a rash of break-ins in this area. And so I've got to try to figure out how we can better communicate that information and how law enforcement can communicate it to at least us so that we can, and then what is the appropriate thing for us to do as far as getting that information out to people? Because I don't want to hinder an investigation, but I also think it's important for people to know, that car that's parked on the side of the road you might not pay attention to, but if there's 3 or 4 break-ins in an area, you might pay attention to it, so.
Just a follow-up clarifying question. So does this mean that Windham County Sheriffs are not reporting to you guys? Or is it that people aren't reporting to them, or both, or?
It could be both. I mean, and it's also Vermont State Police is also responding to them too. So it's not all, Windham County Sheriff right now, we have 20 hours a week. There's a lot of hours in the week, so.
Right.
Yes, it's not, I'm not getting that information.
And we have, at times in the past, gotten that information in more timely and/or less timely fashions. Sometimes we get reports more often. It's a combination, I would say, of the fact that sometimes that information is harder to come by for the sheriff's department, whether they're overtaxed and unable to sort of do the reports as they come out kind of thing, and or whether we're not asking for them specifically. It's been sort of a variety. So I think one of the things that we're hoping to come away from this is a sense of how we can better manage that, because I think that we as a town could be more effective at communicating about our needs for that kind of stuff, and to the public what they should be looking at.
It also just seems critical in terms of making a decision about going forward to actually have the numbers, even if we're estimates. How can we decide?
Well, and I think that, I'm hoping that the information that Lawrence is waiting for from the Sheriff's Department, because you said that also has Vermont State Police data, that will help us.
The department said they would supply some of the VSP data. Part of the problem is that all of you are local, all of you know who to call many times, so instead of dialing 911, you may call a 7-digit number. When Melissa was part of our community as a public servant, she was receiving calls on her cell phone. How do we track cell phone calls that Melissa gets about a vandalized mailbox or whatever? How do you track calls that are not through a 911 center? Federal law requires that the calls that come in on 911 are tracked and logged, and that data is accessible to all of us. 7-digit calls is not the same. And the Sheriff's Department receives 7-digit calls. VSP receives 7-digit calls. So it's trying to get all the information from all of the sources and then figure out what also overlaps. Because when you dial 911 from your home, the public safety answer point for your call is VSP. But that call may go from VSP to the Sheriff's Department if there's a deputy in town. So then we count one call for VSP, and are we counting one for Windham County Sheriff, or are we making sure we're not double counting that same call?
Why are you tracking calls? Aren't you trying to track crime? Just because a call comes in doesn't mean a case is punched to tracking crime.
Right, I understand that, and what seems to be the most accessible data is call log data. How many calls are received and how many incidents are generated out of those calls. And that's what I've asked for.
I would beg to differ on the state police's way of reporting, because our dispatch center, if we receive a call, the crime has to be verified, then a case is punched, and then the trooper would have to respond to it and then re-verify it, and then that's saved data, and that's how I would, if you ask me for stats for a certain period of time, that's how I would get it. It has nothing to do with a phone call, because I could end up getting 3 or 4 phone calls for the same crime. Someone calling back, follow up. It's just, in my opinion, I've been doing this for 26 plus years, that the way to do it is by recorded crimes through the initial call. It has nothing to do with the calls, it's got to do with the crime that's happened.
And so can you enlighten us as to how that data is most readily available from us?
Vermont Criminal Information Center can give you up-to-date data. I can give you data for state police information. I could walk out with my cruiser right now and tell you every crime that's been reported in this town for whatever time period to today. I know we had several burglaries this week, and this burglary rash, if you want to call it, it's not just Putney. It's Townsend, it's Londonderry. We're getting hammered. And once we hit a certain area, they move on to another area. We do have a task force assembled trying to address this, and it's just, it takes time. It's not something that you can solve unless you knuckleheads from the school. You know, that's, we can connect them to doing our work. But a crime spree like this is more than likely, from the information I've gathered, people from out of town, and they're going from town to town trying to keep us on our toes. But rest assured, they'll be caught. They always are.
I did call the crime information centers that we,
Yep.
and he was gonna email what he could get, but he basically told me the information was not as current as we wanted it.
I can get you current till
Okay.
7 minutes ago. So whatever you need. I can do it, not just speaking right now.
Okay.
Whatever you need. I did call you as we spoke.
We play a lot of phone tag.
We do play phone tag, because you could put me on ignore or whatever you did today.
I did just hit a ignore.
Nuisance calls. But I explained to Cynthia that I can come in after hours and sit down with my computer and give you as much data as you want for state police. That's all I have access to.
And follow-up for your question, Lynn, is that this data is available from various different sources and in various different formats. The tricky part, what Lawrence has found in his explorations and what we have generally found, is that coming up with, you know, a sheet that actually tells us all the information that we need to know in order to make an informed decision is not as easy to do as one would like it to be. So, and we're working on that stuff. Again, historically, Windham County Sheriffs have provided us with a certain amount of information. VSP, we have not accessed that information in the past because it hasn't been relevant to a contract that we had. Now it's more relevant because they are a more important primary responder for us. So, but hopefully we are working on compiling that data to help us through this. So, Kathleen Lawrence had a question, and then
Yeah, I actually have two.
yeah.
One is, all calls, are they all public? All calls that go into any law enforcement? As you're saying that you wanted to track all calls.
Well, I think Lieutenant Oliver's point that all calls are not necessarily, I mean,
They don't
I
all
think-
result.
I think it's also the difference in terminology of calls, i.e. actual phone calls that come in versus, you know, responses, calls that these guys go on, et cetera. So, you know, Lieutenant Oliver's point that, you know, there's no point in tracking phone calls if you might have 3 or 4 phone calls that come to one. Is that public information? I would imagine that the data compiled as to the numbers involved is public information. The nature of those calls, I'm guessing, is not, but I don't know the answer to that.
You know, I don't know the answer to that either. I believe it is. I don't see why that would be confidential information. I can tell you how many calls, if I went to the PSAP center, I could tell you how many calls we received. And then it is different terminology. How many cases are punched because of those calls, I could tell you. That's public information.
Right.
So my other question is, you said 50 years ago that the Windham County Sheriff's Department had recommended Putney begin its own police, and that at that time they would be answering to the Sheriff's Department. If we created one at this point, who would they answer to? The state?
Not necessarily answering to anybody particularly. They would be held to a certain level of training, which would be set by presumably the state, I'm guessing.
Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council.
But as far as their, you know, who their boss would be,
Right.
it would be the municipality, and we would be responsible for making sure they maintain their level of training, et cetera, beyond that. And that's one of the reasons that's I would say, in my opinion, a little less tempting than it might otherwise be, is to take on running a police department on top of what we're already doing is a little bit out of our purview. I'd rather, if possible, see it taken on by one of these entities that actually does that for a living,
Exactly,
kind of thing.
exactly.
So,
if the municipality took it on, then they would, in fact, have to, I mean, I would imagine there'd be a learning curve involved in trying to set it up, and then the administrative time and energy and training of that alone.
yes, I mean, but, you know, the other part of an answer to that question is, if you take the fire department as a model for a municipal department that responds to emergency calls, and, you know, we put our confidence in our fire chief. You know, similar concept, different group of people in training, et cetera. But it, you know, lots of municipalities do it. So it's, yes, there would be a learning curve, there would be expenses in upfront, et cetera, et cetera. Is it something one can't do? No, it's a matter of figuring out whether it's economically viable and possible to do. Mike had a question.
Something I'd like to hold up to everybody here, and Melissa's here, and we've got state police and the sheriff's department. Working in social services, I know we ask a lot of law enforcement, and a lot of what they do is really first response to social concerns. And bringing whatever law enforcement is here, they answer the safety, the welfare check calls, there's somebody's overdosed. When we look at what we're going to get for our services, I hope we understand that's a big part of what we've done. One of the reasons I think we had Melissa here to do community policing, and it's that structure is not just for they're going to catch somebody who's breaking into your house. We ask a lot, and they do a great job no matter what we ask of them. I just want to make sure everyone's cognizant of that. You know, there's a lot we ask beyond just the crime pieces of law enforcement work.
Yeah, my question was related to Mike's. I was interested in how you saw a community policing model working here, again, in Putney. I mean, I know how it works in Brattleboro and other cities that I've lived in, but how would you see it working? Or what would you expect from it?
Yeah. Anybody want to elaborate on that?
Well, I was just going to say, part of our reason for being here is to find out how you see it.
Right.
I mean, we have our opinions, we've discussed it and things like that, and we go all over the board just because of the different options available and what we've had in the past. But what do you want? You know, that's really the main question. I mean, if everyone says, well, we don't need anyone, well, then we're done. You know, but if some of you are feeling as if there's a little more dangerous situations going on these days, or you're concerned about these issues, or even public welfare, then, you know, let us know what you need.
I also just want to, in addition to Mike's point about the fact that this is something we expect and need from, I want to say that, you know, in general, or to my knowledge, almost without exception, the providers who provide us with the service we have currently and have had in the past, whether it's VSP, Windham County Sheriffs, our firefighters, EMTs, et cetera, we get really remarkably good personal service from all of these people. They're incredibly committed. They're very good at their jobs. They're well trained. We're very lucky in that fashion. I think really what it is for a question for the town is how much of that we need and how we would like to tweak it sort of more personally for the town of Putney in order to be really what we're hoping for it to be. So, Jeremy?
I just had a question that I think maybe a lot of people in the audience might not understand, and I was hoping that maybe you could hit on maybe the captain and lieutenant about it, is we were talking about the cost. We were talking, the sheriff's office at like $49 an hour, and the state police at 60 something, I forgot the exact number. 68. And we're talking about a lot of felonious crimes happening with burglaries. Could we talk a little bit about the different levels of service we get from level 2 certified and level 3 certified officers? Because I think that's a big difference that people don't know about. Like the average person has no idea. When they see a police officer, they see a police officer, but there's actually a big difference. I didn't know if maybe those two agencies could tell us about those differences?
Somebody from Windham County Sheriff's maybe could elaborate on that a little bit?
Level 2 certified is pretty much a part-time certified officer. They are limited now by the criminal justice changing as far as what they're allowed to investigate now. That's one of the hurdles that we face at the Sheriff's Office in our hiring process now. Primarily, I see Vermont's future ultimately going to full-time certified personnel, which translates to a higher hourly wage. That is one of the hurdles that the Sheriff's Office is definitely facing now versus, somebody full-time certified versus level 2.
And which is level 3 is full-time certified? Is that right?
Yes.
And roughly what percentage of your department is level 3 versus level 2?
Say approximately 50%.
50. And as far as VSP is concerned,
There's no such thing as a level 2 state trooper.
That's
We're all
what I-
full-time certified.
right. Yeah.
And what we've had in the last few years, Melissa, was level 3?
Yes.
And what we,
Well, there wasn't levels when I started the state. I think that's new to this year. So I don't think it's right for someone who hasn't been to the full-time academy, but yes, for the first year, I was part-time, that I could respond to all the crimes. Short of a murder, I can probably call a safe place for that.
But when we're talking about burglaries, can a level 2 investigate a burglary?
They can do the initial, but if a felony charge comes out of it, then it's fine. I believe on the standards now.
So anything
Yeah, they can
that's
do the
felony
initial.
level is not level 2?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Oh, wow.
Like when Sergeant Evans started with us, she was part-time certified, and she did do a host of every investigation a regular full-time officer or deputy would do. And as a result of that, when she was over her head as far as experience, she was provided with somebody more, seasoned to assist her through, and ultimately she transitioned and became full-time certified.
And that's obviously the nature of the process. And
But she had a wealth of knowledge prior to going to full-time academy.
And I'm assuming, Josh, not to put you on the spot, I'm assuming you're level 2 and will at some point, Josh is the deputy who spends more time in Putney at this point than any of the other Windham County Sheriff's deputies. And you're headed towards a level 3 certification at some point in the
Yes.
future? Yeah. And that is a discussion that we had with Sheriff Clark also, was that if we're paying for a service, depending on, when we transitioned, when Melissa was moved, we went from a level, the equivalent, maybe it wasn't called a level at that time, but the equivalent of a level 3 person back to a level 2 person. I think that if we were contracting on a long-term basis and really focused on community policing, then that would play a larger role in how we would anticipate personnel coming in, that we would expect a certain level of training. And I guess I think it would be ideal probably, I'm imagining, for the Sheriff's Department to be able to have a level 3 person on with a level 2 person, for all practical purposes, apprenticing with them for a period of time as they learn the ropes within a given territory, that kind of thing.
Currently, the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council, there's no clear, from what I get from our FTOs and stuff, it's not exactly clear as far as where the future is going to be. It's very confusing for all agencies right now. We're still kind of going by the old model where, if somebody starts off part-time with us, then through demonstration of commitment and their performance, ultimately get to that full-time spot, which is, as I said, what Sergeant Evans did through her performance.
I think maybe not, it sounds like investigating, one can investigate 2 and then, the 2s can't and the 3s can't. Aren't we more interested in when we call, is there a police officer going to come with a weapon and can stop a crime? Is there a difference between a 2 and a 3 for that purpose? When we call?
A level 2 officer can basically freeze the scene, make sure everyone's safe.
Right.
That's what they're there to do. If it's something above their level of training,
Yeah.
they would call in, Sergeant Fellows, myself, Captain, somebody would come
Yeah.
to them immediately.
Because investigation comes after the fact.
Right, it's
and
all about
This is
safety
what
first.
we want,
Crimes in
know?
progress.
Yeah,
Crimes in
crime in
progress.
progress, right.
Although, Richard, I would just, the only part of that I would beg to differ with is the fact that I'm guessing that the vast majority of the time that these guys are patrolling town, they're not actually going to crimes. That when they're doing community policing, that's what we're expecting of them, is to have relationships with the people, the various people in town that are known, unknown, so on and so forth. I think, and ideally, reducing the number of crimes that occur. When you look at the number of burglaries, for example, if 2015 we had 2 burglaries reported in the town of Putney, which is I'm guessing that's low. It probably doesn't include what VSP did, but even so, if you look at the number of those, it's, like being in a doctor's office, how many heart attacks are you dealing with? Not that many, but you want the right person there at the right time, so.
One thing I want to point out as well, and this is not a pitch, but when Sergeant Evans was in Putney, a good example was Santa's Land. Okay, you were paying for one deputy 40 hours a week, and he hit it right on the head when he said that she was above and beyond that 40 hours, which was the commitment she demonstrated to the town. But when we had to actually go in to start seizing animals, that was not a one deputy job. I believe, and Melissa could provide the numbers, maybe, what was there, 6 of us there?
Plus the fire department.
Yeah, and that was above and beyond. There was no extra charge to the town of Putney for that. And yes, it was us supporting the town of Putney, but it was more us supporting our deputy in need for her investigation. It had to be done. And that's always what we've tried to do, whether it was Sergeant Evans or Josh out there. That's our commitment to them and the town.
And Richard, I wasn't meaning to
No,
cut you off
right.
on your point. I'm just guessing that statistically, the amount of time that they're spending actually sort of interrupting a crime is probably pretty small. The other thing is that, the required primary responder is the VSP for anything in that situation. And then it's a question of timeliness, really. Michael? Yeah.
So, Frank, thank you, committee, for always, you guys are amazing volunteering your time. Just as a citizen thinking about what would be a good option, it's really hard without having data because cost. Ideally, what I'd like is a bunch of full-time people as wonderful as Melissa and Lieutenant Oliver from the state, these wonderful guys, and twice as many firemen, but my property tax is virtually unaffordable right now, and I'm not kidding. So the thing that really jumped out at me was that despite the spread between the cost of the VSP and the sheriff's office, about a 30% difference, the difference is that overage. I don't know what the official terminology is. The guy who has to go to court, the guy who has to, do additional investigative stuff, perhaps community support, from Michael's point of view. That seems like a bottomless pit that would convey strongly in favor of using VSP, but without knowing how many actual crimes, as opposed to phone calls there are, and without knowing the amount of time spent on those, and without knowing some sort of projection from the state about where our crime situation is going to go, it's pretty hard to know what to do. But if that data was available, I'll bet you, I'm just guessing, but the guesstimate would be probably VSP, because those additional costs are borne out by the state.
Can I interject through my memory of being here for 7 years? I did not spend that much time in court. My cases were usually put out.
Can you step around the corner, please?
I did not spend that much time in court.
So follow-up question to Melissa's comment is that all that the extra time would be as a matter of going to court, or are there other additional services that are provided that would be funded by the state? Because my impression from what someone here said was it was beyond that, but I'm just curious.
Lieutenant Oliver, can you comment on that as to sort of how much time, for example, we had this discussion with Lieutenant Oliver in determining who we were going to contract with for this 6-month period that we're currently in, and we talked about the sort of the 20-hour a week model. And in a 20-hour contract, how much would you guess goes beyond that 20 hours for time that one of your people spends on, for all practical purposes, the state's dollar? working through stuff.
Well, obviously, it'd be if there was an arrest or an enforcement action that was taken that needed follow-up. If a trooper came in for a 5-hour patrol and, wrote a couple of tickets, they could foreseeably be seen to have to go to traffic court 6 weeks down the road. That's, the state owns that. Any of those tickets that trooper wrote is owned by that trooper in the state after that. So you get billed for the hours of the enforcement, the state picks up that, DWIs. If you get a major crime, obviously we would be calling in our major crimes unit or BCI or scuba teams or KNA teams, whatever special team, that's no charge, we own that. So the only charge you get from the state police, period, is the initial coverage of the patrol. So I can't tell you what it would be after that, because we don't have a need to take care of it, it's the price of doing business. So that's what you get with the state police, you get the additional special teams at no extra cost. If there's a trooper in town and they need backup, another trooper comes in, no cost. I'm not sure if that's how it works with the sheriff. If another trooper comes in, do they charge it twice now? I don't know. For the state police, it isn't that. You get the contractual hours we're working. Anything after that, we own.
But don't they get that anyway?
They do get it anyways, and we've talked about that. So these burglaries that have occurred, and maybe you see it, maybe you don't, we've increased our directed patrols.
Yeah.
We said, hey, we're professionals. We're not gonna just say, hey, there's burglaries going on, whatever. So we have more troopers in the area. The sergeants are dictating that 3-4 troopers do what's called a wolf pack, and they come in town and they do directed patrols to try to find suspicious vehicles, out-of-place vehicles. So that's not billed at all.
So I just want to follow up. One of the things that I am starting to do, which honestly, I probably should have been doing it since I've been here, is really going through the reports on a monthly. We get a report from the Sheriff's Department every month, and it tells what they did on a daily basis. And last month we had, I think there was 77 hours billed to us and to our contract, and 8 of those hours were spent on casework, on paperwork, or I don't know what that terminology is, but so that's kind of the. And I'm not saying it because they shouldn't be doing that, they have to, and somebody's gotta pay for those hours. I totally get the funding model, it's not a knock on what they do. If Melissa had to do paperwork when she was here, there's paperwork that's involved in this, and somebody has to pay for it, so I get it, but to try to get that data for us over the next few months for us to make a decision on which way to go, that's what I'm starting to do now. And of course, I only have 1 month worth under the new contract, so.
And one more follow-up to this. Just a business question I would ask under normal circumstances, and something I might do. If I'm negotiating a contract with someone with anticipation that it's going to be a long-term relationship where that contract is going to want to be renewed, assuming goodwill on both sides, I like to have an estimate or a sense, either from an historical perspective, and better yet, from the provider, what the likely increase will be going down the road. It's really hard for you guys to do the wonderful job you do when the cost of getting services goes up by 100 or 200% in 1 year.
Right, we know, and that.
And that might be another reason to choose one or the other, if they can make some reasonable estimation.
Yeah, no, and
that's reliable.
I sort of commented on that and saying that the Windham County Sheriff's Department is coming to terms with that reality that they can't provide the service they were providing for the cost they were charging, so.
Not their fault.
Exactly, nature of the beast, it's just what it is.
Is there some way that, as a town, we could establish either a protocol or a mechanism so that we could report all the issues, the burglaries, the break-ins? And I don't know what it would look like. There's been a bit of a grassroots effort to have a spreadsheet, a Google Docs sheet. But if it was something that was available to everybody and we were all aware of it, I think that would be helpful. If nothing else, raise awareness, let people know, oh, there have been break-ins in your neighborhood.
Right. No, I had a conversation with another neighbor of ours the other day, sort of along those lines of whether we should be considering, and I think this is a sort of a town-wide question.
Right. It has to be town-wide.
Is a neighborhood watch concept, and I've never been part of a neighborhood watch, so I don't know exactly what that means.
And that scares me a little bit, Josh. I don't want vigilantes, controlling the neighborhood. I want the book club out with guns.
But more than anything else, to have information available, like you say, that so that people are, because I drive around all the time. I could be looking at cars in people's driveways. I never do because I'm never thinking about it. But it probably wouldn't be a bad idea at certain times to pay more attention. But you're right.
The only thing I want to say is that I'm all for information. I think that that's what's going to help us in all of this decision-making and like you said, keeping people informed. I would like some if it's going to be, it has to be, if it's going to happen, it's going to have to be a town function, you know, kind of wheelhouse it, that kind of thing. I want some training in how to manage that information, because I don't know if anybody followed even Facebook the other day. Every single person that commented became a cop. They were telling people how to investigate it. I mean, it's like, you really don't think that they've thought of this. I mean, so when you start sharing information through a document, are people going to start calling the police and saying, I think you should do, I want to know how to manage that before that.
So that's a protocol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I think, I'm assuming that between the law enforcement agencies that we have access to, there's steps that could be taken that would help us in that direction. They must do this with other people somewhere, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
Alan had a question.
So I have some idea of the costs of these two organizations, or of hiring somebody on our own. I have some idea of some of the extra expertise the state police have. What I haven't heard is if they would have a different concept of what community policing is. And I think that would be useful for us to hear.
Lieutenant Oliver, can you comment?
I'd have to do some research, and like whoever answered it up there, what are you looking for? We can custom, you want enforcement? We can do that. Do you want visibility? Do you want property checks? You want speed traps? What are you looking for? Speed enforcement? So it's all, so we have 8 other contracts with 8 other towns. And the largest one we have is Londonderry, and they are right now looking at building their own police department. They're doing a lot of research, and I'm working with them hand in hand. Maybe you should get in contact with Paul Gordon out there, because he's an excellent resource. But I told them when I did the $88,000, so it's 25 hours a week, I told them, you tell me what you want, and that's what we'll give you. So that's what I would answer that question with.
So I don't know, what's happened in the past, but the ideal police department for me would be somebody who would go out and identify the troubled kids. They could help get them through school, they could help get them a job, they could make sure they don't become criminals.
Right.
That would be ideal.
Right.
And I don't know, if either of these organizations are prepared to do that for us. Or be involved with that process.
I think either one of them is very happy to be involved with that process. I'm guessing, and I don't want to speak out of line here at all, I'm guessing that's more along the lines of what Windham County Sheriffs tend to do as their model than what VSP does as their model. Does that mean VSP couldn't do that for us if we were asking them for that? No, I don't think it does mean that at all. But I think that, they have a different flavor to them. And we've talked about that before at previous meetings. I think that's again, part of the question we're trying to answer. What does community policing look like to us, and how does it translate into achieving what we want it to? And I think your point about, again, as I called it before, proactive versus reactive, I think all of us want that. And so how we achieve that is what we're trying to figure out.
If I could just, that's the more abstract part of it all. I mean, this is something that we came upon as we talked about things that we've had in the past, is that someone who's living within the community and building relationships with people is going to have potentially more of an impact, but you can't necessarily measure it, and it goes beyond the fiscal end of it. You don't know down the line how much money you end up saving over time because you built these relationships. People are willing to talk to you because they don't feel intimidated. I'm not saying anyone's intimidating, but because of those reasons. And so that's really the difficult part to kind of calculate, so to speak.
Wendy?
Yeah, I'm wondering, I'm glad to hear that we can actually get up-to-date access to any cases that go through the Vermont State Police. And I'm wondering if that's also possible with the sheriff, and that if there's a way, as Cynthia said, to try to locate a main database, even if it's within the town hall. Can we get that same information from the sheriff's department? Is that possible?
Yes, I think it's a question of how timeliness, how readily available that is at any given time. Because I'm imagining that's all recorded digitally at this point, or whatever the means might be. So it's probably
Also
ready.
encouraged to make contact with the town administrator, if not daily, frequently, just to say, hey, this is what's going on, whether it's our agency or another agency, by what they've heard.
Yeah. So, yes, it's, in answering Lynn's question, I feel a little ignorant by saying, well, I sort of don't know when this is available to us. But, the reality is this is something we're trying to figure out how to manage at the
No, I
time,
understand, and I think.
sort of where are we going with it? And I think it's clear that it's coming upon us to, that information is available. It's how we access it and use it to our advantage that becomes important. So, Janet?
I want to know, in this 20 hours that we are contracted with the Sheriff's Department, how they spend their time, because I never see a sheriff's car come out by us. Do you ever see somebody pass your house?
Yeah,
They're
always there.
Well, they're never out. They're never out our way. And so, I know that it's a lot of mileage. It's a large area, but what are we asking from them? Like in that 20 hours, are we saying, hey, just stay in town and pull people over? Because that's what we see. And we don't see the outskirts of town being addressed and the needs of those of us that live out in the woods.
I think we probably do see that more than we see and realize. We have roughly 66 miles of dirt road in Putney. For somebody circulating around there, the amount of time that they're actually going to drive by your house, if they're driving around all the time, is only going to be limited. We have seen a lot of presence in the village. I think that's partly the nature of Josh's introduction to the town of Putney and learning about it. Melissa, I would guess, over time, started out spending more time sort of focused in a certain area and then spread out as she got more experience. Is that right, wrong?
I went all over the place.
One thing I can do is start, because the report that I get on a monthly basis tells the roads that were patrolled on the day that the officer is out. So that can be shared too, or you can come in and look at it, or I can put it on the website so that you can see, like he said, you just didn't see them come by, or, I read it and he's patrolling but it's a very limited amount of hours. 40 hours versus 20 now is a very short amount of time to be patrolling, but he's out there not just on Route 5, but I can share that report with you.
The other idea, the other thing is that Deputy Farrow, as the deputy that's in town currently, the contract has changed with the 20 hours as opposed to when it was 40 as to what he's contracted to cover. So he's right now not doing criminal cases. He's strictly doing.
Well, the contract does say that he will investigate criminal activity.
Right, so we've gone to some criminals, but it's not the extent of what we were doing before. He's primarily here for motor vehicle enforcement and community policing, and he's been doing that.
I just wanted to add that number for 2015 is incorrect because we were broken into, and it has not been solved. So.
Well, I don't know that those are solved.
But he was like, and they'll get caught, but we.
Pat?
As far as the municipal police would go, is there any state or federal subsidy on that? Or is there, I don't know, I thought I heard you mention something about a grant?
Jeremy, I don't know whether you can elaborate on that at all, or Melissa. The way we started with Melissa, as I said, or with Windham County Sheriff's, happened to be Melissa, was through what was called the COPS program, which stands for Community Outreach Police something. But the potential, I think the answer is there's more than likely grant money available. Does that become ongoing? Less likely. So, could we probably garner some grant money to help us start a police department? I'm guessing yes. And Melissa, you could comment on that?
There's deadlines every year, so there's a COPS grant, but you apply for it in the summer by a deadline, and then it's issued, the decision's issued in the fall. But to apply for it, you have to have already made the decision that you want to move forward with the police department, because you have to have an ORI number. Don't ask me what that means, maybe Oliver can say. But you have to have that number in place so you can fill out paperwork to get grants.
Melissa, people can't hear you over here.
Sorry, Paul. So you can't apply for any of the grants until you've decided to move forward with actual having a police department. Because there's certain federal numbers you have to have in place. At least
So
that's what it is.
it's a chicken and egg question.
Right, so there's plenty of there'll always be a grant available, there's just different ones. You're not gonna get the COPS grant again. The town would get it as a different entity than the sheriff's
You need to
office.
step forward.
The town could get the COPS grant because you're a different entity than the sheriff's office, but I don't think a police department can get it twice. I
And
could be wrong on that, but.
And typically, grants, as you know from grant experience, that they run a course and then, you can, there's always grant money to be had, but are we going to be able to underwrite a police department in perpetuity through grant money? No. Are we going to be able to get new equipment from time to time with grant money? Are we going to be able to have training opportunities, et cetera? Yes, certainly. But to be able to look at it as sort of a possible way of funding a significant portion of it over the long haul, I think the answer is probably not really. But
How about state
don't know.
or even federal?
Well, I think that's federal, right? The grants that she's taught is federal.
Oh, so you would have to apply, okay.
Yeah.
Cynthia, Jessica.
Yes, Jessica?
I have a financial question. So right now with the contract that we have, it's 20 hours for $50,000 for the year. But we only took 6 months of that
Correct.
contract.
Yeah.
So after those 20 hours, let's say at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Josh is technically off the clock.
Yep.
Where does the call go? Does it go to VSP and then we're billed $66 an hour?
No.
No.
No, it goes to VSP and that is provided to us by the state. We do not pay for that.
Okay.
And that has always been the case. They are the ones, the weekend being a good example, the break-in occurred on Saturday night when Herb arrived on Monday morning and discovered it. You might want to elaborate on this, but go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Herb Pelletier, I'm the principal at the elementary school, Putney Central. So early Saturday morning, we had this break-in activity. As Josh mentioned earlier, we had a couple of guys in the building for quite a while, and we were able to record some of their travels in the building and some of their activity. Monday morning, the head of maintenance, Steve Napoli, came in and gave me a call right away. I happened to be down on the Cape that day. Looking forward to going striper fishing. That did not happen. So in any case, he said, hey, my tools have been rifled. I said, take a look around. I said, it's unlikely that it's just one spot. And he called me right back and said, yeah, so it looks like we've been hit. And he called in to the sheriff's department. The response was, they're not on duty today. Nobody's on duty in town. We'll patch you through to VSP, which did happen. And one of the troopers responded via telephone at the time to Steve to get at least a preliminary report of activity. The way the rest of it unfolded was I got here on the scene back at school at around noon or 1 o'clock, and we started to ascertain by that time that we had had a substantial amount of stuff taken. So I called back into the barracks in Westminster and essentially asked for permission from them. I didn't want to compromise any investigation that might have been ongoing that I didn't know about, because that can happen. Asked for permission to go the Facebook route with this, and was granted, yeah, sure, absolutely, whatever you can do. And by that night,
later that evening, around midnight or so, these two guys walked into the Brattleboro Police Department to turn themselves in. And I guess the rationale was that, you know, the jig's up, we better do this. And that happened to be the nearest place that was open, according to their knowledge. So that's how that unfolded. Since then, Corporal Sorensen, Mike Sorensen, has been terrific in assisting us in recovering the stuff. We got most of the stuff back. I'm going to go one more time to the barracks tomorrow morning, hopefully to get the rest of it. And they've been charged and processed, and they have a court date in October. So it's a good outcome.
It to me highlights a couple things that we've been talking about, though. You know, one, the fact that Steve called the Windham County Sheriff's Department presumably by, as Lawrence refers to them, 7-digit numbers. You know, had that been a 911 call, it would have gone to VSP dispatch, it would have gone straight to VSP. They were then transferred over to VSP, presumably not through the 911 system, but on a 7-digit, you know, this is some of the complication of that. But then the fact also that somebody took from VSP took a report over the phone, but to my knowledge, VSP did not enter the building at any time until, or have they?
No, it was just a time, I think frankly it was more of a timing thing. The trooper who took the information on Monday happened to have Tuesday and Wednesday off. So he sort of handed it off. Once the Brat PD had these guys show up, they didn't know anything about what was going on, so they obviously contacted their colleagues at the state police, and they said, oh yeah, we've got this on file, and they took it from there. I don't know what the internal stuff happened, but that's how it happened.
But again, as far as, you know, from my perspective, that, you know, I think we all of us are contaminated by the fact that we watch TV and everything happens in 45 minutes. You know, the fact that Windham County Sheriffs weren't going to show up that day, the Vermont State Police didn't show up that day, had a phone conversation, you know, but then he happened to be off for 2 days. It was until the guys turned themselves in that VSP did more, and I'm not saying VSP should have been doing more because the guys turned themselves in. But, you know, this sort of thought that you're going to call a phone number and somebody's going to show up and they're going to investigate and take fingerprints and DNA evidence and so on and so forth, and it's all going to be done, that's not a reality for us. So, you know, I think that, and I'm not trying to make light of any of this, I'm just pointing out that's the reality we face as a small rural town in non-life-threatening emergencies, is that timeliness is an issue. And especially if you're the person against whom that crime has been committed, you're sitting there feeling like, wait a minute, these guys aren't even coming? They're, you know, wait, he's not in town today and this guy's got 2 days off and nobody's showing up? That doesn't feel like great personal service. So, yeah, Jessica.
More about the great personal service, I think going back to the point about the what a local person who is in your community, raising their kids in your community, going to school with your kids and your grandkids, is really, it's priceless. And so it is difficult to factor that in. I mean, Sheriff Martin's connection with our kids was, I didn't realize how profound it was until she left.
Yeah.
And they were all kind of going, well, who, you know, where's she going? Why isn't she staying here? Like, they'd grown very comfortable and accustomed to her and her child who was going to school at the public school. And so I think that should weigh in as well.
Yeah.
And knowing who's who. And when we go with these other contracts, can we specifically say we would like these hours divided among 2 officers so that we get to know them? Or is it this person could do 8 and another person could do 8 and another person could do 8 and we never know who is there?
We can ask for a certain type of service. Vermont State Police, they're less able to do that because of the way they're structured.
Sure, they're spread all over.
Windham County Sheriffs have been trying to keep Josh in town most of the time, so he's been more visible, but there are days when they're scheduled and Josh is not on, and that's just the way it is. you know, I think we also, you know, where we live, these are all local people. I mean, you know, these guys all live in one of the towns in probably Windham County, and, you know, the state police, I think we have 4 troopers who live in Putney right now, something like that. So we've got a lot of them around, and we do have, you know, close relationships with them. But I agree with you, the nature of that sort of one dedicated person, I agree, is very valuable.
Being comfortable with who you're seeing.
Yeah.
It's really nice, and knowing that your kids are comfortable with who they're seeing, and they're
Yes.
more likely to connect and speak up when they notice something that's not
Yeah.
right.
Billy?
So a couple things. I did hear Lieutenant Oliver say very clearly that VSP will do what we want them to do.
Yes.
And, you know, if we want a certain type of coverage, they'll provide it. So that's on us to say, here's what we want. I'm assuming you guys will do the same thing.
Yes.
Is that true? So one question I have is, how are we currently directing Windham County to cover the town? I mean, we know.
I need to, one thing I just want to say, when you just asked if they will do, the conversation that I remember with Sheriff Clark recently is that he is not sure at the end of this contract if he will be able to provide us with somebody, let's say for 40 hours a week.
But even if it's 20 hours a week.
Right, but if we are looking to have somebody here for a more dedicated amount of time. So I was under the impression that it was an evolving situation there where they need to figure out what their structure is going to look like. That was, is that the conversation you remember with him, Josh? I mean, I don't want to, so I'm hoping that, you know, it will.
Right, I guess I just don't understand
But
that.
I do not direct, if there's something specific that comes to me, you know, I'll call Josh and have him come in and say, you know, can you, but I do not call them and direct them the days that they work, where they're driving.
Well, for example,
Yeah.
can we say we're spending X amount of time for X amount of hours a week? We want 4 of those hours to be spent on traffic enforcement, no more than that, or 6. And we want the balance of the time to be spent, you know, I'd like to see Josh at the general store for a couple hours a week. I think that would be hugely beneficial in terms of, and you may be doing that, I don't know. But if I were calling the shots in terms of where you're spending your time, that's a place where you get one-on-one face time that addresses a lot of the concerns that have come up here tonight about getting to know the community so that we can work toward prevention instead of just response. I mean, response is important, but the key here, and I think especially in light of the rash of burglaries, is, you know, certainly speaking for myself, I want to prevent more burglaries. And I think it also touches on, Josh, your point, following up on Herv's story about sometimes the delays in responses because of where we live are part and parcel of life. We deal with that in the fire department on the medical side sometimes. We're waiting for VSP, we're waiting for rescue. We live in an information age, and we have to do a better job making sure that our vendors, whoever they are getting us the information about what is happening in town in a really timely manner, and that somehow we can get that information out to the community. Because I happened to have a conversation with one of the state police on Main Street the other day, right after I was talking to Cynthia, and he said, we're looking for a blue minivan that may or may not be involved in some of the recent. That would be a really good piece of information potentially to be able to disseminate, if that's true, that a blue minivan is possibly involved with some of what's been going on in the last 2 weeks. I happen to know that in the break-in on Leon Wood Road, a black, probably Honda or similar sedan was spotted on Leon Wood Road, which is right near where we live. I'm keeping my eye out for a black Honda that doesn't normally cruise the roads there. That kind of information, from my point of view, is really essential to get out to the community. And I can't understand in 2016 why we would be struggling to get that information from our law enforcement partners and disseminate it.
Well, yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I think the answer from my perspective is because we haven't done it yet.
Right.
And that's no reason for not doing it, we just haven't done it yet, and it needs to be
Okay,
potentially
so I would say
part of the model we should be
Right,
looking
so
at.
going forward, in answer to sort of Steve's, you know, at the beginning of the meeting, what is it that we want? I want to make sure that whoever is providing these services to us is contractually obligated to provide some kind of flow of information that makes it easy for Cynthia as the town manager to know what's going on, to know what suspicious vehicles are perhaps involved, to know what time of day the burglaries are happening. I mean, I've had to go around to neighbors, and you know, because we've talked, and I've talked with Alice, to find out when are people being broken into. And I've been trying to tell people it seems like it's happening during the day. Why do we have to piece that together? And I might be wrong. Half of them might be happening at night.
Exactly. That's the thing that comes to my mind after the events of the weekend. You know, that thing got posted, there were 125,000 Facebook hits on that within 24 hours. As Cynthia said, everybody was a cop. Everybody's saying, you're looking for a blue minivan, you're looking for a black Honda, you're looking, you know, I think controlling that is probably not as simple as we would like it to be. The other thing is, yeah, no, I know, just to be clear, no. But you know, I'm guessing Windham County Sheriffs could have 3 full-time people trying to do something like that and still not get all that information out there in a timely fashion the way we would like it to be out there. You know, then when it comes to town, who's going to be doing that? You know, it's a matter, I would agree with you, that's a model we should look at and incorporate it, but I think to assume that we can do that in a financially viable way and that they can provide us with that information in a financially viable way might be difficult. And I don't know where VSP weighs in on this, but go ahead.
Okay, so part of this is when, for the 6 years that Melissa was here, and the 8, I don't know how many months Josh has been here now, but they do come in. Melissa was in my office all the time. Josh is in my office telling me what he's doing. I think what the difference is between the two and where maybe I got a little complacent in just not checking all the time was that Melissa was doing, Josh is doing primarily vehicle, stops. Well, is he gonna, he comes in and tells me not much going on today, do you have anything for me, that kind of thing. Melissa was coming in and telling me the kinds of things if there was a break-in or that kind of thing. It's just they're doing different things. I think the piece I'm missing is I need to communicate with the state police more than I ever really knew that I needed to. So the information, I don't want to say the information is never coming to us. I do, and to be honest with you, it feels like this is kind of the first time in the 5 years that I've been here that, not that we haven't had break-ins or not, this is a significant event that's happened in the last couple months of this rash of break-ins or whatever we want to call them, that I've never talked about this in 5 years. This is the first time that I've really, so I'm learning from it to know that, you know, that I need to open the communications with the Vermont State Police a little bit more because we have less coverage from the Sheriff's Department. Josh is primarily doing traffic, and there's not a lot to report on that. I mean,
there's some dynamics involved too. I've only been here for a month and a half since I've taken over this area. I was transferred here to, you know, when we consolidated the barracks. Cynthia and I are just building this communication, and I've talked to her more in the past 3 weeks than darn near any other select board. So I'm more than happy to give you as much information as we have, and then you can disseminate it as you fit. I don't have a Facebook page. I don't know how to post it for, I don't know whether or Snapchat or any of that stuff. I'd be happy to give any information we have to Cynthia.
So your point is totally well taken, Billy. I totally agree with you. We need to, and I think this has been a conversation in the last 6 months, is communication is totally broken down, and I'm hoping that that is going to get better no matter what we do. Because even if we create our own police department, there are still going to be other agencies involved. Because we cannot
do it ourselves.
24/7, 365 days a year. It just is not feasible.
No, and my point about saying, you know, these guys could have a full-time person, you know, the problem is Cynthia has a full-time job already, and I know you know this. You know, to ask her to be the clearinghouse for information from VSP, Windham County Sheriffs, anybody who's posting on Facebook, so on and so forth. it's impossible. So, I think you're saying that it should be a contractual part of something going forward. I think that's a good thing to explore, and what that would look like and who that person might be and how they would do it is something we can look into. But we can't take that on in town hall. It's not possible, And I don't think these guys can take it on in their office because I don't think it's possible for them. They're not set up for it. So I think it's great, and I think it's part of the community policing model and the neighborhood watch model that we're sort of looking at. But how we go about it is a different question, definitely. Lynn?
I guess I was sort of curious. So and maybe you said this in the very beginning and I missed it because I was a few minutes late. We switched to a different contract for financial reasons, is that?
Yes and no. Basically, because that's what was offered to us.
Okay.
It was, the Windham County Sheriffs were not able to offer us the 40-hour-a-week contract they had previously offered to us, and the financial picture changed dramatically. So,
okay. And if we wanted Josh to be doing slightly different, we can redirect if that's.
Ask him to.
I mean, it does seem like the whole reason we're here is we're responding to somewhat of a crisis in our neighborhood, which is why.
That's the reason many people are here, but the fact is.
Oh, you guys were here for another reason.
We've been doing this for years now,
okay.
Trying to figure this out. More recently, with the Windham County Sheriff's Department, we've been doing it for 9 months, on a weekly basis, trying to figure this stuff out. These guys, it was as of 2013 that we put together a public safety group who have been exploring this. So, a lot of the faces here are people who are related to what's been going on recently, but again, it's a much bigger community question that we're trying to answer. So, Jess?
Does the possibility exist of Putney forming its own police station and sharing or patrolling a neighboring town? Or contracting with Landmark to provide some of their?
We've been playing with that idea.
To offset the cost or share the cost?
Goodband he's on the Dummerston Selectboard. Zeke's there. There's a woman whose name I don't know from Westminster Selectboard. And Russ is the town manager in the white shirt by the door there. Town manager from Westminster. We are opening questions about that. We're just getting going on whether that's a possibility. I think that would be a great idea. The legalities of it, the logistics of it are not simple. How Windham County Sheriffs would play into that, how other entities would play into that.
Placing town constables, like this woman here was saying, in each town to kind of navigate this new era of being present and creating a safety bulletin network with the VSP or the Sheriff's Department and your local authorities and the community at large to say, hey, by the way, if you live in this neighborhood, this is what we've seen, keep your eyes peeled. Because, raise your hand if you're a daily walker, runner, biker, or just like to sit on your front porch and watch the traffic go by. Pretty much everybody in this room has their eyes and their presence in their community all the time. And if I knew, I'm looking for a late model green Subaru, I'm going to say, wait, what was that? Yeah, something that might actually stick out of the ordinary would be more right, a Tesla.
With a dog in it. Michael. Sorry to bring this up, but I just have to. It's a loved joke of mine. So there's a guy selling pencils on the street corner. A guy comes out of his business who's had a good day, and he buys for $0.25, that's what the sign says, buys the guy's pencil. And the pencil, as he puts it in his pocket, he realizes it's gold and ivory and silver filigree. It's priceless. And he says to the old timer who sold it to him, he says, gosh, you must lose a fortune on each one of those, that you sell. And the guy goes, that's all right, I make up for it on volume. And here's this joke. Look, the reason that there's an economy of scale in doing things on a larger basis is that there's an economy of scale in doing things on a larger basis. Right. And I'm really, I don't know this nice lady's name, but I'm very empathetic and sympathetic to the idea of local and, we know each other. It's why we buy our food here. But there's some things that you just can't do that way as efficiently or as well. The state police, you know, the reason they've got scuba teams and all these cool computers is because it's a big thing across the whole state.
Right.
And in an era where we're finding less and less money and more need, it's the question can't just be what we want. It also has to be in the scale of what's going to be the most efficient, is going to keep people safest, and ultimately is the most effective. And no one I admire more than Mike Merwicki. I was on the board with Putney Family Services. They do a great job helping kids find a place in the community.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a more, because that's all volunteer, maybe that's a more efficient way to make our children feel safe and included. And maybe we can't know our police officers that intimately, although actually I live down the block from a state trooper.
But maybe that is a role for a constable.
A component
A component of, you know, that is a person that's in our community. They're not policing, but they know people. And I don't know how
That might be an
would look.
efficient way to do it.
I don't know, you know, there's not a lot of money involved in it, and it may just be somebody that just talks to people, and then, you know, I don't know. I mean, it's a thought.
Lieutenant Oliver.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I have to leave, so I'm going to leave you with this. We're not in competition with the sheriff.
Right.
Whatever you
Right.
folks decide you want, we're here. If the sheriffs get the contract, that's what you folks decide, we'll support them. Of course we will. That's our job. So I'll work with you folks any way you want to get this accomplished, whether it's with them, whether it's with us, whether it's a combination, constable, whatever you want. So I'll leave it at that. Open line of communications, let me know what you need.
Yeah.
So.
No, and I think ponying on to what Michael said, and in reference to that, I think what we're talking about for economy of scale is including all these people in a model that works well for all of us, because that's.
Whatever
the
you
only
folks
way
need, I wish you the
we can
best of luck, that's
realistically do it.
what I'm here for, that's my job. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we probably hashed over and solved all the issues, so. I'm wondering what we want to come away from this with. I'm thinking that one of the things I'm hearing loudly and clearly is we need clearer data compilation and information to know exactly how many of what we have, what our requirements are as far as, you know, I mean, we could have 24-hour people and we're still not going to have coverage all the time that we want it, kind of thing. So what's realistic for us?
I'm wondering if you could perhaps have a straw poll right now just to see where people are.
On what? VSP versus Windham County Sheriff versus Municipal?
Yeah. Just to see what people are thinking.
Good idea.
That's, yep, I think we could do that.
Without the data, though.
Even without the data.
Small pool, I would suggest. Yeah, it's a very small pool. Go ahead, Pat.
Josh, to just clarify that if there's a felony in town, the Vermont State Police will respond, and that the costs for that service is paid for. There is no direct
Are
cost.
borne by the
Okay.
state.
So if we have a Windham County Sheriff representative in town, they're not going to spend a lot of their time dealing with the felonies because they immediately get punted to the Vermont State Police. Is that correct?
Currently, that is correct. As of July 1st, because of the nature of the change in our contract. Previously, our 40-hour-a-week person did the bulk of that. Not always all of it, because if they weren't on duty and VSP was the primary responder, whoever is the primary responder becomes the primary investigator.
Josh, can I just say I used to keep,
Step around.
let's
Let's
just
go
come over
here.
here. I used to be nosy, so I would check my numbers versus VSP numbers as far as call volume, and it was about half and half every year. Sometimes they were a little more, sometimes I was a little more. So the same thing was happening then. They were still covering the calls when I wasn't on.
Right.
But I think they cover more now, a lot more.
Now they do. Well, they're also the primary responders on everything. So we are leaning much harder on VSP than we did in the past timeliness of arrival then becomes a question.
Yeah, it matters to me, maybe if we're doing a straw poll, it has to be pretty loosely structured, because
Yeah, I agree.
what interests me is retaining that community police presence.
Yes.
I mean, Melissa, your model is one that seemed to be working quite well, and if things hadn't changed, you know, that would be what we're doing, is a 40-hour-a-week sort of community policeman. So I would advocate that at a minimum, I would like that. I also, if there's a way to utilize the Vermont State Police, because the costs are borne by the state, to follow up on the majority of the serious business and retain that relationship, you know, free up hours that the sheriff has, or that our community police person has. That's a model that interests me. And also, it's hard to make any real decision if you're in, and if your neighbor got burglarized recently, then you're sort of hyper aware. If it didn't happen, so I don't really know how significant this crime spree, you know, or rash of burglaries is, and whether we should be having data to help us make a decision to respond much differently than we have in the past because something has changed in our community. I have a feeling it's a little blip, and that we should be thinking in more long-term, how, you know, was it working well over the last few years, and is that a model we want to continue?
Yes.
So if we're trying to do a straw poll on ideas, I would say one of the ideas might be continuing with the 40-hour community policing. We know that it's going to cost more than it has in the past. And improving our relationship, or, you know, making sure that Vermont State Police has a strong relationship with our community.
And I also feel like a straw poll, I think everybody feels perhaps that what we really need is to figure out how to have all these groups work together to provide us with what we need, more than to choose one who's going to provide us with what we need, because I'm not sure one can provide us with what we need necessarily. What does that look like, I think, is the burden's on us to figure that out over the next 3 to 6 months. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. Yeah.
If we have a contract with the state police, do we then have any sort of prioritization
Yes.
when they get a call from
If
Putney?
we have a contract with the state police, then they spend that number of hours a week in the town of Putney doing what we direct them to, which is the same with the Windham County
But if
Sheriffs.
they're not in town during their designated hours, we
They
still go
are
on the wait
they
list.
are in the town during their designated hours.
Right, no, I mean, if something happens outside of their designated hours, I'm sorry, I missed.
Then
Then we
they're
just
the
go on the
primary
wait
responder. Whoever's the closest trooper comes. Again, it's all triage through
But it's all
911.
triage, yeah.
So it's, you know, if it's happens to be, you know, a robbery where nobody's life is at risk, it could be 3 days before we see anybody. But that's true with Windham County Sheriffs too. It's different. I mean, you know, it depends on who's around. You know, it's not as clean cut as that, but with VSP, you know, they're dealing with stuff that has to be dealt with in a way.
I think they've all have given excellent service.
Absolutely.
Nothing I'm saying is meant as any kind of criticism at all. I'm very pleased with the service that we've been getting from all departments always.
Yeah, no, and I would also point out your question about whether you've seen a car recently in your neighborhood. Nothing against Melissa, but I don't think I saw a car in our neighborhood when Melissa was on very often either. It's just the nature of the beast. I mean,
I did
you
run
know,
into her from time to time.
from time to time, and I think you would probably run into Josh from time
I'd be
to
like,
time.
oh, what's
you
going
know.
on up
Yeah,
there?
exactly. And you start wondering why they're there. But
Did you have your eggs stolen once? I went up
we had our eggs stolen once, yes. High crime neighborhood. It wasn't a rash of egg stealings.
I just want to add to this conversation that we need to, whatever direction we go, we need to talk to the agency about animal control.
Yes.
it has been really difficult the last week to handle some animal issues that we have, and today Josh and Dana helped me out with something, thank goodness, but that has to be part of that conversation because we do not have the expertise. I am afraid of dogs, so sending me out there is just going to cause me to get bit. So we have had an animal control officer position open. It's very small stipend. Mike's going to be the animal control.
I brought this up at the Windham Regional Commission, and they're talking about
a regional.
Doing this regionally.
It should be.
Well, I'm on the committee that
Yeah.
is trying to do that. It's a difficult, Brattleboro and I have been in a conversation for months, and that seems to me like the best solution, but it's really hard to get it started. But it has to be part of the conversation because most of the time animal problems really turn into a problem between people. Most of the time it can be a dangerous situation. An animal call sometimes is not really an animal call. It's two neighbors that really just want to argue with each other.
Sick their animals.
Yeah, so that has to be part of this conversation as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
In addressing, I'm sorry, the lady in the pink, your question, Jessica, with regard to, an agency that would cover more than one town or something, one of the things that I looked into and asked about was contacting the largest agency in our area, which happens to be Brattleboro PD, to see if they would want to do anything under contract. So you're starting to move, spread their authority over an area. They do not have the personnel for that. It becomes a personnel issue apparently for all of these agencies. Yeah. That's the reason our hours are reduced from 40 to 20. It's just simply a personnel agency.
No, I'm thinking of the surrounding towns that have a similar demand on their manpower resources in terms of, I don't think that Westminster and Dummerston are high crime areas. I think that their crime rates are probably pretty similar to Putney, and the calls are going to be very similar in what they require. I mean, that's what I was thinking, like these other smaller entities and becoming something a little larger. And maybe even, I don't know what Landmark does, but even maybe saying, hey, we could offset some of the cost if we contracted some security with them. I don't know if that's ever done.
I just want to go back to the question of a straw poll. So what the plan was, a lot of what we wanted to bring tonight was some data. The crime statistics was one we really wanted to bring, which we tried to get. It's going back 3 weeks now of trying to get that data. I did not realize that the state police had it. I didn't get connected with him. So one of the things that we talked about is having a second meeting in September where now that we've heard from everybody, and our sense was that people wanted to continue with some type of community policing. That was our sense on the Public Safety Committee. That was the sense of the Select Board. But we didn't want to assume that without gathering everybody together. So I feel like that's definitely where we're leaning towards as this group is here. I have everybody's email addresses over here. Over the course of the next month, I can start sending information out to people that we start to gather. Then maybe the next meeting is when a straw poll needs to be done. Because there's a conversation, I need to have a conversation with Sheriff Clark about maybe at this point he has some more direction of where he'll be in January. I don't know. To answer that question of, do you think you'll have somebody 40 hours that can be dedicated to the town of Putney? I didn't hear tonight that we shouldn't keep exploring all the options. I feel like all the options are still, I didn't hear anybody say no, absolutely not. I don't. So I think that's going to be the work of this committee. If anybody feels the need to join, we're looking for more people.
Saying whether it's a level 2 person or a level 3 person, because that's a big distinction, it seems to me.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Right now, the answer is yes. It hasn't come up before. So I think going forward, any type of a contract we were likely to enter into, that would be part of the negotiation, would be what that looked like and how much we would pay for that person, and or do we have a minimum requirement for a person? So.
Josh?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you for bringing us all together, because it was really helpful for me to hear what to expect of the Sheriff's Department and what to expect of the Vermont State Police, and what you guys are doing to address all of this really helps to, you know, just
One of the
helps to hear it
suggestions
all.
that I've
Thank you.
gotten since over the last week is having another meeting. But the meeting is more geared towards asking some police officers to come and help people understand what they should do in, you know, I mean, Wendy, I hate to put you on the spot, but when Wendy went home the other day, her front door is open. She's more aware of it right now, but at that day it wasn't really. So what do you do when you go home and you know there's been burglaries in the area and the front door is open? Do you go in? Do you, just to try to help us understand what it is we can do to help the police in this effort, because we know they can't be here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and what is appropriate for us to do, and what is inappropriate for us to do. I mean, there are, I'm sure, some things that we shouldn't be doing. So I'm going to try to pull that together and see if we can have something that will just, that's not focused on what we're going to do in Putney, who we're going to hire, really just about helping people understand, you know, like the neighborhood watch suggestion that Josh was saying, you know, is that something that neighborhoods should think about doing? I don't know if that's helpful to law enforcement or if it's everybody turns into a cop like they did on Facebook. I don't know. So I would like to try to pull that together as well. So
Kathleen had one more question, and then hopefully we can.
I of course want to thank you guys and everybody for coming in, because we're so fortunate in Putney to have people who care as much as all of us do. And I certainly agree with Cynthia in that we should wait on a straw poll, let some conversation start happening in town. You know, we're also fortunate in that people aren't shy about talking to each other about things. And it's helpful, you know, it is helpful. I mean, we don't know what the right thing is going to be. Cynthia had mentioned that the board that's formed up there might need more members. Is that right, Cynthia?
Well, actually.
Oh, the committee, sorry.
The committee, perhaps more members, not necessarily, but help.
Help,
I mean,
right.
one of the big things, I mean, is we're meeting, you know, sometimes having a meeting, discussing these things, going over data and trying to take notes, you know, for minutes. I mean, none of us are very good note takers.
Eric's really good.
Yeah. But I mean, so it could be something like that. It could be someone who's got, you know, a couple hours once a month or once every 2 months or something like that doesn't mind taking minutes. Or if we need to find out some other information, making calls to a law enforcement agency or something else. But I mean, we have limited time. There's only so much we can do.
Well,
you know, so any way people can help out is really appreciated.
Yeah.
I would say, you know, I was trying to sort of summarize what I was coming away from this with, and one of it is more data. You know, the other thing that occurs to me, we really need to figure out, and I think the select board as well as the public safety, is what does exceptional community policing look like, and how does it happen in the places where it is exceptional? What's that?
Melissa was the model for that.
Well, she may have been, but we don't know.
Is it an option?
I don't know. It has not been an option. Does that mean it's not an option? I can't answer that.
Can we get you back?
I would love to.
Yeah, I know. So, and really, you know, we have exceptional care from, you know, we're getting great service all around. Melissa provided service, and, you know, this has been a tricky part of our conversation all the way through, because Melissa was the known face that went along with what we had going on. I think that Windham County sheriffs do this all day, every day in all our communities, so we can't, you know.
The level of involvement that Melissa had in this community was above and beyond.
And how we make that happen again, whether that's a wider community effort, including more organizations, Putney Family Services, some sort of data distribution, some sort of, whatever it looks like, how we do it.
No, my
is a
question, Josh,
going
is
forward.
the option of getting Melissa back out there?
We would have to ask
I
the
don't
sheriff Mark that question. I haven't asked
So
him.
he's the one responsible. He makes the decision.
The answer has been no, but I don't have an answer for you right now. So, all right. Go ahead. Yeah, we did, also Cynthia raised last night at our meeting, just to recognize the firefighter, Justin Beebe, I believe his name was, who, from Westminster, who many of you read about in the Commons. People from our community and all over are doing exceptional things for all of us all the time, and just to be cognizant of that and grateful for the efforts that everybody puts in. So,
And if you guys could relay Putney's condolences to Sheldon, that would be much appreciated.
and our firefighters and EMTs and police and everybody here. Thank you. Thank you. We will have another meeting. I'm not sure whether maybe we'll decide that once you all have dispersed.
I think it's going to
exactly.
depend on if we have more when we get more information. I don't want to bring everybody back and say, sorry, we don't have anything, but I will be, if you don't want me to email you, you should cross your email off that. But that's how I can keep people updated that are here. If anybody wants to be added to it, let me know.
Let Cynthia know if you want to help.
Every other Wednesday.